Cameron, how are you, mate?
Good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, going really well. Tom. If you haven't
Hey mate,
met
nice to
already,
meet
I'm,
you.
I'm pointing if you're
Nice to
watching
meet
on the
you.
YouTube, as like a bit of a plug, bit of a segue. We're up on YouTube if that's how you like to ingest your podcast information. I'm pretty emotive, I suppose, and I'm like a bit up and about and use my hands a lot when I'm telling stories. And I don't know what Cameron's like, but Tom actually just like sits there, literally like a statue. Um, so if
I
you're gonna
move my
watch me,
hands,
actually
but you can't see them. It's
yeah,
unreal.
true. The
So
camera's a little higher up. The
cameras
last
are
one
high.
was literally all me
I know how good. I
for the
may have
entire.
messed up the recording there, but this one won't be. So
It was,
if anyone wants just to look at Luke for a good hour or so, either do one of his sessions, in which way
we're
you
not
can pay
selling it.
for it. Otherwise, just jump on YouTube, which is free, and you can just stare at him.
We're not. Well, that's not really a massive selling point, but
The
yeah.
views are going to go
Oh,
through the
mate,
roof. We
that's
could double. We could double from 2 to 4 views. Who
Is
knows?
this episode 11?
It is. It is
That's
already.
episode 11.
crazy. That's crazy. It's flying by, and I feel like they're just getting better. To be honest, maybe that's a little biased opinion, but it I rewatched episode 10, and that's how I know that it was just me for an hour and a half or whatever it was, and I was mortified. I didn't realize that's what I like. My resting face is just something else. So let's try and get a little bit more of the other
That'll be
two
resolved.
people.
That's resolved. But anyway, Cam, thanks for jumping on. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, man.
Of course, I've heard a lot about you probably in the last month or so, just in regards to how learned you are and well researched, and possibly having some different standard beliefs maybe than the general society, and all backed up by your own research, I guess. So I don't know where you want to maybe give a brief on yourself, but I definitely have some questions.
Yeah, for sure, man. Like, yeah, I was thinking about this of how would I kind of explain myself coming onto it, because I've never done a podcast before. And I guess like the foundational relationship of me and Luke is through fitness. Like,
Yeah.
I've probably come to this more as like a ex-PT fitnessy kind of guy. I've had experience in competition with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and bits and pieces of other stuff. I've kind of dabbled in a lot of stuff, but I guess that's kind of like, that's my background. I'm like a health and wellness guy. I had a personal training business for a few years, and I met Luke through the Institute. But I've done other stuff. Like, my journey into fitness in the first place was because I was like massively overweight. I was 137 kilos at my biggest when I was 19. And within a year, I grew up in the country, and I'd moved to Adelaide to pursue like mixed martial arts and jiu-jitsu. And within a year, I dropped down to 67 kilos. So I had this real like insane year, an insane period of growth. And that's kind of where my journey really started.
Dude,
I've done
that's
other
60
stuff
kilos in a year. How did you, like, so many physiological changes that would have taken place? What,
Oh,
like, I'm
I went
speechless, number one. That's
temporarily
awesome.
insane.
Yeah,
Like,
I bet.
I went mental, man. I really I was in a bad way. I was not doing well at that point in my life, and I had a few pivotal things happen that really changed it. And I just made a deal with myself one day of like, if not now, when? I'd jump on the scales, and I'd see it go from like 90 to 100, and then 100 to 105, and 100 to 110. And then all of a sudden, it was kind of like, if I don't make some sort of drastic change now, when's it going to happen? When am I going to change? So I just made a deal with myself, and I got a gym membership on New Year's Day, and I went and I got on a treadmill, and I ran 300 meters and puked. And I remember just being like,
Gnarly.
no, like,
Yeah,
I'm going to run 10 kilometers every single day. I just made this deal with myself. I'll always do it. And I did. Like, I just forced myself. I was brutal with myself, man. And I ran until I had shin splints and stress fractures, and I would train 3 hours every single day. And I had no idea what I was doing. I was just like completely useless. I think my workout for the first like year was to just run 10 kilometers and do military press, but I just kind
Did
of
you
like,
actually run 10Ks a day?
yeah, I ran 10Ks every day until I couldn't run, man, because my shins were just destroyed,
Yeah.
and I was like, I just forced myself to do it. I was running in like Globe skate shoes because I had no idea. I had no friends that were into training, and it was like the early days of the internet. Well, not the early days, but early days in terms of like health and fitness. There's no like influencers and stuff like that. So I was just kind of like working it out as I went. And I got involved with boxing and judo and other bits and pieces later on down the track. And that's kind of where it all started for me.
That's like I was going to say modern day Goggins, but Goggins is modern day.
He's modern day. The OG,
Australian,
the Goggins. Yeah, you inspired.
That's
David.
crazy. Where did you draw that? That must have been. You used the term pivotal. That must have been such a pivotal moment for you. How do you stay consistent with that? Because I'm sure if you're overweight like that, I'm sure that you're not. Well, you were obviously highly motivated, but maintaining that level of motivation must have been challenging. Like you're getting injured, you got shin splints. Like,
oh yeah,
that must have been tough.
It's like mentally exhausting, even when they talk about like the Bulgarian method where they took the guys and they did their max every day for however long. Like the burnout was mental. It wasn't physical. It was mental. Like you can really push your body far beyond any capacity that you really think you have. But it's like the mental burnout. But at the time, I really love Goggins, like I didn't find Goggins until he became like big Goggins, but going back and like listening to his audiobook and stuff like that, it's like, wow, we had a really similar mentality. And I was dark, man. I got super, super dark. I had a really bizarre lifestyle because I was in the country and I was like teaching music during the day, but I was so embarrassed to go to the gym during the day. I would go at 2 a.m. because it was like one of the only 24-hour gyms there. And they let me have the PA. So I'd come and I'd put on the same like Hatebreed album because I was just this angry, teenager. And I would just get into it, man. I just really I don't think I'd be able to find that level of motivation ever again. It's always been something that I've never quite reached that same sort of level of intensity, but it's probably a good thing as well. It's not good to just destroy yourself and go that level of intensity is making up for a massive deficit in terms of knowledge, so that's something that I've definitely balanced out over time. But I was highly motivated by my life, things that had happened to me. I just couldn't live that way anymore. You get to the point where it's like the pain of the sacrifice and the pain of what you're putting yourself through is kind of easier than if you were just going to stay the other way.
Yeah, for sure. In terms of so you did the physical stuff, you did the 10K and the 10K day in military dress, love it. There's lower body, upper body balance workout.
So well rounded.
What other things did you find that I didn't know we were going to have this conversation. This is unreal, first of all. What other things did you find that happened over that journey, be it nutrition, things that you wanted to forego because of this passion and this mental desire to improve your physical ability or physical aesthetic? What sort of things did you layer in? Was there a nutrition component, or was it just I just need to move every day and I can keep doing what I'm doing? Or was it how did that side of it go outside of the gym?
Oh, babe, I didn't know anything about nutrition, I probably made it 3 times as hard for myself just by not having that kind of knowledge there. And there were other factors, I used to smoke and I used to drink and stuff like that when I was younger, because growing up in the country is very much like parties, there's just nothing else happening. So I'd stopped all of that sort of stuff, but I had no idea about diet or nutrition or anything like that. I just went super hard because I thought that's what you did. I thought you just turned up at the gym and you trained and eventually you would kind of lose weight. I don't think I even really had any concept of calories in versus calories out. If you asked me what a macro was, I would have had no idea. But I was just highly motivated by lifestyle factors, I guess.
So was there any change? or was it a case of you literally just kept consuming the same things, but just trained?
I definitely thought I did what I thought was healthier, in terms of just eating more fruit and vegetables and stuff like that. But it was in hindsight, it was really stupid. It was kind of useless. But I kind of just pushed through it. I think I got to 83 kilos before I even sought more information on diet and stuff like that. I was just really...
You lost 50 kilos by that point.
Yeah, roughly, yeah.
It's crazy. That's crazy. So, how do you maintain that level of motivation? At some point you must have been all right, I'm less than 100 now. Time to hang up the boots. I'm sick of this daily grind. or you just like, you had an end goal and you were just it was do or die?
I had an end goal. I had two highly motivating factors. The first one was one of my best friends died. And he was like a very special person, like a super magical person. His name was Matthew Duncan. And I think about this guy all the time. He was just so talented, man. Like he was a skater. I met him through skating. I used to skate when I was younger. And he rode motocross and rode BMX and stuff like that. And there was this kind of like local, what would you say, like folklore, I guess, about this guy of being the first dude to do a flare in the half pipe in Port Augusta. And he was the sponsored motocross rider. He was just like amazing guy, you know, and he was raised with these values by his dad, Jimmy, to just like seek knowledge firsthand. And I remember I was skating in the town one day and he came up to me and said like, oh, hey, everyone doesn't like you, man. So I just wanted to find out why. And we were just immediately like best friends at this point, you know, and he was like a real, like I idolized this guy, and he was 21 when I met him and I was 16. Mm-hmm. And he was like this real first kind of like mentor that I had of just intensity, you know. He just had this intensity with life. Like I remember seeing him kickflip a 9 stair, and for me at that point in my life it was like, this guy's a god, you know. It's insane. And he couldn't land it, and he kept trying and then after he got it, he had a broken ankle, and I remember being like, wow, this guy did this with a broken ankle. He was just like this insane person. And he died in a car accident, and I was at his funeral, and I just remember thinking like, man, you know, there was hundreds of people there. You know, this guy was really influential and everyone loved him. Everyone admired this guy. And I remember thinking like, you know, like he's gone and I'm just like squandering my life, you know, like he's had all these opportunities and he's lost everything. And here I am, like I could have done so much more by this point, and I've just kind of wasted it. And it was highly motivating for me. Like I drove from the funeral to the gym and got a gym membership. And then it was like 2 days later that I started training. And the other thing was that this is like 2007 or 2008. And there was a box set of The Ultimate Fighter at Sanity, like the DVD and CD store.
Yeah.
And it was like season 1 Ultimate Fighter, like way back. And
with Forrest?
Yeah, Forrest Griffin.
Forrest Griffin. That was sick.
That was such a good season, man.
Such a good season.
Like I'd never really seen anything like this before because it wasn't around, you know, like they really set the stage for all this sort of stuff. So I remember like binge watching this, like the whole thing, and being like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to move away and do this stuff. And like back then, no one even knew what, like I remember talking to people about mixed martial arts and they'd be like, what's that? And back then you were trying to explain like, oh, it's like cage fighting, you know. It was super lame. But I was obsessed with it. And I like went and joined the boxing club, went and joined the judo club, and I just was hooked, you know, like I was training every single day. I was going to the boxing club every day. I was going to the judo club like 4 nights a week or something like that. And like those two things really had just set me on the path. And if I look back, it's like the intensity that Matty had really was a huge influence for me of just like going hard all the time, which I don't think is the good thing to do now. But at the time, it was a huge motivating factor.
So how old were you?
I mean, obviously it really worked. Sorry, Tom.
Sorry, how old were you when you went through that 70 kilo weight loss? 19. Jeez. Formative years. That's unreal.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. It was really insane, man. And I kind of like, I'd gone through this because I was living in the country and I was really isolated. Like I didn't have many friends. And because I quit drinking and wanted to live a better life, all of my friends kind of wrote me off. So I just had this whole year of kind of like extreme isolation and just going super hard. And then all of a sudden I was like this, still a kid, you know, like in the city, living by myself, training jiu-jitsu 6 days a week. And like, it was an insane change. You know, I remember being like, looking around like, wow, a year ago, this was like really different. You know?
What do you think the hook was for you for martial arts? Was it as a young dude, you've had some trauma with your friend dying, like your idol, with your friends like casting you away? Do you think that it was a way of venting or like getting some aggression out? Or do you think it was just like the stars aligned and this was just a new obsession for you?
Oh, for sure, for sure. Like, I'm a pretty open person, so like, I went through a lot of stuff when I was younger. It's not like I had this like awful life or anything. Like, I had a really like good upbringing. I came from a good family, but from like at the same time from a broken home, and like without a male role model or anything like that. And I had a lot of trauma, man. Like, I got really viciously beaten a couple of times when I was younger, when I was 16, and then again when I was 18. It was pretty hectic, like, and I think it was just my way of kind of dealing with that sort of stuff and trying to, I guess, come to terms with my own sense of masculinity, I guess, in some sort of way. Not that I think that thing, like that masculinity and martial arts are deeply entwined in any sense, but I think it's pretty common, especially living in a society where there's no real rite of passage. I think there's so many young guys who get involved with that sort of stuff because they're looking for it. There's no sense of what's the word, initiation. And there's a lot of good books written on this, like, and this is how I understand it now, is that there's no rite of passage which takes us from our like teenage formative years through to like, all right, you're a man now. And I think there's so many young guys throw themselves into martial arts, and that's probably what I was doing, kind of like trying to work through my own unresolved trauma from all this stuff that happened to me and this kind of bizarro lifestyle that I had growing up. And I was hooked on it. I was hooked because of that. I think it gave me a sense of myself and something to identify with.
So you weren't consciously making that decision to be like, all right, I need to find some form of initiation into adulthood here.
No,
it was like, this is a post reflection. I'm assuming, looking back on it, you're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense that I had gone through these things. And you and I have talked at length about what your environment has been like and how that kind of creates you as a person. It makes a lot of sense in reflection that that's what you were seeking, but you weren't thinking about it at the time. It was just like kind of lucky that that's what you fell into.
Yeah, I don't think I even had like any understanding of what that would be. Like, if you asked me what initiation was, I don't think I would have any concept of that, but I think it's a deep archetypal like substructure of the human psyche that so many guys are deeply searching for, because the closest thing we have is kind of like drinking at the pubs with your mates, which is really like not it at all.
Yeah.
And I think we're like, at the time I could look around and see so many guys were looking for that, even through like the skating and the BMX and stuff like that. I think that's what that is. I think that's why so many people are drawn towards that as a kind of individuating process.
Yeah. So in Western culture, it's not so definitive. It seems like you go out and you fend for yourself for a week. And if you live, then congratulations, you're a man now. It just seems like it's kind of, it's like a slow grind. And then eventually you wake up and you're like, oh my God, I'm an adult now. Like, what? I've got a 9-to-5 job. And, and people kind of, like, you're not necessarily like the youngest in the group anymore. And it's like, oh, okay, like I'm an adult now. There's no real very definitive point of going from childhood to adulthood. And it's, and I think a lot of people miss out on that. A lot of men miss out on that. And as 3 dudes, I guess we can talk more on being men than being women, obviously. So can you talk on that maybe? Like, what do you see as the downfall of not having that really definitive initiation into like becoming a man?
I guess like we don't have a real, well, this is just what I think anyway, that we don't have a real sense of responsibility in terms of our like part of the community, or our part of the wider structure of society. And just like, it's funny you would say that, because I think you're totally right, man. Like, if you don't seek that out, it will happen anyway, but it's just going to happen in maybe not so much of a positive way, where you might find yourself at 32 as a dad or something like that. And all of a sudden, like, oh, I'm not a kid anymore. What does that mean? And I think that's why so many people go through a kind of like personality crisis, because they're just not ready for that. And there's no real clear, definitive leap or jump. Whereas if you look at more kind of like either archaic societies or indigenous cultures or something like that, there is this real point of like at 13, 14 or whatever, this thing happens as a symbol of that. Like, what's the saying in Africa? If we don't initiate the men, they'll burn the village down. And I think that's like, obviously it's a metaphor, but I think that's totally true. Like there needs to be this point where you kind of understand that you have a responsibility to yourself, to the people around you, to your friends, to your loved ones, to your family. And and we're missing that. You know, I think you can go so far in your life and still be this kind of like child in an adult's body because you haven't gone through some period like that, a really formative period.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, actually, just like kind of reflecting as we're talking about it, having, you know, doing my PT qualification at 17 or just 18, you know, going through a rough patch and probably not dealing with that at the time. And then basically like straight into running a business and then really just like, I mean, we talk about it at the Institute where you have to put a bit of a mask on whenever you step into the gym or, you know, wherever you're kind of delivering fitness. It's like outside world can't seep into that business world. And I took that very literally and yeah, went through some of the toughest years of my life, literally at like 18 or 19, starting this business and trying to be this like lighthouse of like beaming energy and positivity and knowledge and not really maybe dealing with the like the stuff that I was going through in family life at the time. And then all of a sudden I'm now teaching the PT qualification and then suddenly I'm 27 and, and I still haven't like, you know, maybe had that time to deal with it. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. I'm not sure if you can kind of like do it at a later age or what, but I feel like I'm kind of at that point now where I realize that I'm a man and, you know, but I'm maybe still dealing with issues from those formative years of, you know, when I was 17, 18, 19 and going through that and really just like masking all of my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting topic. Where do you see, like, what cultures do you see as being some of the better, or not better, I hate to use that term, but what cultures do you see having a really good initiation process that you're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, or that's like really trialing or telling of the men that come out the other side of that?
It's hard to say, you know, like there's this sort of like cultural relativity where it's really hard to say if one is necessarily better than the other in any way. Obviously, like we've talked a lot about psychedelics and things like that, or plant medicines, whatever you want to call it. And I think those more archaic societies that have a clear transitional kind of period where you have this ego shattering experience, I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, I think it's a much more natural way of being alive. But all these cultures are different as well. Like if you look in the Amazon where they're doing ayahuasca and stuff like that, like they give a teaspoon of ayahuasca to babies. You know, it's which is from a Western perspective that's so bizarre. Or if you look at like Native American cultures, like where there's Wachuma shamans, like San Pedro shamans, that's more of a teenage kind of thing, and everything's going to be relevant to the culture that it kind of comes out of. So it's hard to say which one is better. You know, I think we could do a good job of it in the West with just a few little tweaks, you know.
What would you propose?
Martial arts, you know, I don't know, something like that. Like I think it's
what does it entail then? Like what do you think? What do you see as like being called? You know, someone has to go through what to have been to have this initiation in inverted commas.
I think an ego shattering experience, you know, right. Like you need to recognize that you are not the center of the universe. The world doesn't revolve around you. And ultimately you have a duty to society and a duty to your community and a duty to everyone. And that there comes a point where you kind of break away from society and individuate in your teenage years. But ultimately you have to come back to that as a fully constructed person who can, I guess, be a constructive member of that tribe or society or whatever you want to call it. I mean, that, like, I'm obviously looking at all this stuff through the like lens of my own life. Yeah. And I think that's where like martial arts was such a positive thing for me because it was ego shattering, you know, like it was great. Like I remember the point. I can remember my ego being broken and being like, wow, like it's I really have to change. And then that went across my entire life. You know, I just had a different attitude towards life and how I would achieve my goals and stuff.
Obviously, you've had that experience, and you can only possibly speak from that. But that's quite a physical overcoming of that ego. Could you perhaps propose like alternative, like you say, your plant medicines, whereby it is more of a spiritual overcoming of an ego, or a mental, as opposed to actually having to be potentially humbled or physically? Or do you feel like that's a necessary part of it?
Yeah, I think it's whatever works, whatever works. I've certainly, I look at these kind of things and I hate using the term plant medicine because I think there's so many like connotations towards it. And it's definitely become very like trendy and a bit pretentious over the last maybe 5 to 6 years, but that can be extraordinarily beneficial as well. Like that was a huge pivotal turn in my life too. But I think physically, like physical initiations, like the body is tied to the mind and the mind is tied to the body. The spirit is part of the biological organism as well. So I still think that like physical events will have a massive translation to your psyche. That's why someone could come into personal training and within 6 months be a completely different person who walked through the door. While that might have been a physical change, it does affect their psyche and affect their, I guess, what would you say, mentality. But it's about finding what works for you. Like it's not going to be the same for everyone, because ultimately, like maybe people don't want to go and do jiu-jitsu and wrestle and something like that. But if they went and did ayahuasca, that would be much more relative to themselves and their life and their own kind of journey of healing or growing.
Do you think maybe then like barreling down that path, like you say with your martial arts, and I'm trying to think from a obviously male perspective, having not done martial arts, from my very basic research, which is I'm not referencing, there's no double-blind studies here, but a lot of people that have gone down the martial arts route, I don't hear or see or meet a lot of men who have gone down that martial arts route who have also done a team sport, and have been, heavily invested in both. You either do, say, a martial art, or you do a team sport, or any sort of ball sport, maybe, like as you grow through adolescence and you get to, between 15 to 20 plus. So once you hit 20, you're either doing one or the other. It's very rare that you would meet someone that's like, cool, I do BJJ every day and I play footy on the weekend.
Yeah, I know, isn't that bizarre?
Yeah, so therefore, like you say, with your martial arts route, it's like, could those who have continued down the team sport or individual sport have that humbling ego experience? Because potentially especially with the upcoming generation, they're built up to not fail, or fail, no one fails. You just participation award or whatever the fuck they're talking about these days. Like, I'm curious to see maybe how that plays out, and maybe if you could give your thoughts on that sort of idea of like, cool, let's say, team sports is one avenue for men to be humbled and to have their ego shattered, using your words. Martial arts is another, ayahuasca or some sort of, what's psychedelic enlightenment might be another. Say you continue down those avenues, but then you've got this new generation of humans who are just like, no, you didn't lose, you just came second in a 1v1 tournament sort of thing. Like, no, you lost. Like, I'm curious to see, does that delay this ego shattering enlightenment that we need?
Well, do you think there's a point in these sorts of sports, like team sports, ball sports, all this kind of stuff, where your weaknesses are so exposed?
I think I could probably talk on this. I think for me personally, and this might be different for everyone, every young dude that plays footy or whatever, or basketball or soccer or whatever the sport may be, it is super delayed, I think. And maybe that was just me. Maybe because my ego was so ingrained in me that I could never, like as you just said, Cam, like your weaknesses are never super highlighted in that, because your teammate potentially bring it up. What you're bad at, they're good at, and vice versa. And there's just kind of like this confirmation bias constantly. And especially if you have success in team sport, like I think that delays it massively. I never really had that until either running a business, or probably more so when I was doing jiu-jitsu, which is only for a short period, but I even felt that myself, that ego death, that ego shattering experience. It's like, yeah, actually you're not as good as what you think. And these people that have been doing this for just 6 months more than you are so much better than you. And yeah, I just to kind of reply to that, Tom, I think that, yeah, team sport doesn't really allow it as much. I think it really needs to be an individualized thing, like super individuated. You're maybe competing against other people of the same caliber or people of the same age that have been doing it for way longer. And that's the super humbling experience, because I don't think you're getting that consistently beaten down in team sport. Like if you are ever like suboptimal, then you can kind of hide in your 22 other or 21 other teammates that are playing the game. Whereas in like jiu-jitsu, for example, if you're suboptimal, you get rolled and it's just like, and you get tapped, and you potentially, if you don't tap, then you get hurt or you get put to sleep. Or I feel like it really needs to be an individual thing, like a, mano y mano, where you're just like, it's you and it's your abilities versus him or her and their abilities. What do you think about that, Cam?
Yeah, I totally agree, man. I think it's like the consequence, like firstly, the consequences have to be dire. I think that's where the real growth kind of happens. And if you're looking at this stuff from a kind of like a Jungian perspective of like the hero's journey, like Joseph Campbell wrote a lot on the hero's journey, which is what I really believe this is. You have to go it alone. It's the hero's journey into the underworld. Like Peterson talks, like Jordan Peterson talks a lot about this sort of stuff of like slaying the dragon. And while I'm not a real Jordan Peterson fan, I think there's a lot of relevance to that, which you kind of don't really get much out of team sports, because it's so easy to pass the buck of like, oh, that guy messed the pass up. Oh, the wind was blowing. Like, oh yeah, it would have gone in if the wind wasn't that big that day or something like that.
Yeah.
There's so many excuses you can make to really not be like, no, this is me. This is on me. I made a mistake. This person was better than me. This person crushed me or whatever, Like it's easy to pass the buck about it being someone else's fault until someone has got you like mounted in a competition 5 minutes into a 6-minute match or something like that. Then that's all on you, and I think that's where the real magic kind of happens.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah. And as you say, you can just hide so easily. And maybe Tom, you've had a different experience, but I just did not have that same humbling experience as when I first started jiu-jitsu, where it was.
I would say it's different. I'm going to disagree, but like I would say, like for the majority, potentially not. If you don't have if you're not as self-aware, like you can absolutely, but if you're hiding in a team sport, you're hiding in a team sport. If you're so self-aware that you can go, nah, fucked up, that guy's better than me in a team sport as an individual on the team, even if you won or lost. I have had that experience. Like I've come off a field in a win and gone, I played shit. I've come off a field in a loss and say I played well. Like hopefully most people who have been in a team have played that way or have felt that experience. Not saying 100%. It's as humbling. It's, as you mentioned, Cam, it's got to be earth shattering. Like it's got to be super overwhelming, and I potentially it would take a lot longer. Like if I have done a fraction of some BJJ, and trust me, I got humbled straight away, and I was just like, fuck, this is intense. I wouldn't say it was my ego that got humbled, because literally I was brand new and I was like, I didn't expect to be, it wasn't a level playing field, but I've definitely had it in a team sport, in an individual sport as well, where you're just like, man, I'm getting, my ass handed to me. And it's when you're young, for me, it was when I was young and had aspirations of being elite. And it was like, just the realization, it's like, oh, I'm so far off the measure of where I need to be. Like if I want to play at any sort of elite level, there's no way I'm going to get there continuing this trajectory. And that was a humbling realization, thinking that, I was a duck's nuts, and then just getting literally your ass handed to you on a field by just direct opposition, irrespective of team result. Again, it happens it requires self-awareness. And it would probably take longer than potentially a one-on-one or a 1v1 sort of, be it a physical sport or a MMA or something like that, or a one-on-one sport. But yeah, I've definitely felt it.
Self-awareness is a good way to put it. So it's like you really need that sense of accountability, don't you? You really need to be able to reflect on yourself and I guess like your individual part in the wider process of the game.
Yeah, big time.
What did you play?
I played field hockey.
Oh, right. Cool.
The ultimate man's sport. Yeah.
That's not massive here in SA, but.
Oh, no, it's not. It's not massive here in SA.
Yeah.
I can definitely attest to that. But in WA, it's probably the biggest in the nation. So.
Yeah, right.
Very huge community and culture over there for field hockey. The national team play there, blah, 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 blah. So, you can go and watch literally the best team in the world play every week.
Wow.
So, the aspirations and the community there and the drive and all that is peak level. And I was not peak. Started late bloomer, and just did not continue down that path. But yeah, I think I'm not disagreeing that a one-on-one physical experience is a quicker journey, but I wouldn't fully rule out, some sort of team progression or team sport or team something where you're just like, yeah, well, I got humbled. Even in a workplace, I feel like people can get quite humbled, and I don't know if they could have this experience, but I can't see how they couldn't. There's definitely opportunity to be humbled in a corporate space and go, oh, fuck, I'm not at the level I thought I was for this role or in this position, or I'm letting the team down as an individual. Because you're always, well, a majority of humans and men, I would imagine, are like always should be proud of what they're putting forward in terms of who they are as a person and the work they put forward and all that sort of stuff. So when you get found out or caught out, again, self-awareness, as you mentioned, Cam, is that you need that self-awareness to go, yep, that was me, like own it. Might take longer, but yeah, I still think it could be found.
I completely agree. And this is what I mean when I'm talking about like in the social work literature, they refer to this as like the individuation process. And that is going to look vastly different for everyone, but it's about taking that passage of initiation or your calling. Joseph Campbell refers to it a lot as like the hero's call, the call to action. So maybe that is in a corporate space, or maybe it's in a team sport. Maybe it's joining a pottery group or something, but it's finding whatever that little burning thing is inside of you and following it and having the, like the reflective skills to be able to look at yourself and your faults and where you made mistakes and how to improve.
How important do you think it is to have something that you're like, that burning fire, that thing that you're chasing? For you, it was like potentially you saw how we're just mortal, and we're so finite that you were like, fuck, I have to do something now. I'm just never going to do it. You had that at 19. How important do you think it is that you've got this end thing that you're chasing?
I think everyone needs it, man. Like, I think everyone needs some calling in life, like that's the real basis of meaning. And like, like in the psychological literature, they talk a lot about how positive emotion, not pleasure, but positive emotion is always goal-based. It's in relation to a goal. So I think if you're going to find any kind of thread of meaning in other, like, and I'm a bit nihilistic, like I think it's a very abstract, bizarro world that we live in, and you have to make the meaning yourself. You have to find some semblance of a point. So like, I think that's what goals are, it's just tricking yourself for long enough to think that life has a point, and not in a bad way, like that's really liberating.
I can see how you could be liberated by that, but it could also be extremely depressing. And I mean, that's humbling in itself. But you go down that nihilistic route far enough and you're like, well, what's the point? At 82.3 years, I'm going to die anyway, or whatever the average life expectancy. I think it's less than that for a man, actually. But if you go down that route far enough, but then it's also, you see that you're immortal, and it's like, well, I mean, the average age of us, how old do you count?
I'm 30.
Yeah. So we're like, our average age is like 29, 30 between the three of us. So we're probably about a third of the way through our lives. It's like, that's pretty motivating in itself. It's like time is just kind of slipping by, I can see how that could be motivating, but I think that having that thing that you can see is achievable in your lifetime, and hopefully, well, for me personally, it's lots of short-term goals that I can tick off in the next 12 months to 5 years potentially, rather than like, all right, in 25 years, I want to have like created a family and, and have this like really nice lifestyle or whatever. It's like, no, I need stuff that's way more short-term than that. Otherwise I'll just kind of lose focus, Do you feel the same, or do you have really long-term goals where you like, you have a young boy, Logan, and you really want to make sure that he goes to a nice school, or like what kind of goals are you chasing?
Yeah, well, my goals shifted massively as soon as Logan was born. Like things were really, really different for me. Like before he was born, I was at uni and I wanted to pursue the whole like career academic thing. And as soon as he was born, my life just got turned upside down, man. And like it really like it's good to have goals, like I definitely have goals. I'm always training, I'm always trying to get stronger. I've had a lot of injuries that have kept me off the mats for a while, but I'm just getting back into training. And like I love those things, and they're a good little segue to positive emotion, but they've definitely taken the back seat. You know, like the biggest goal in my life at the moment is getting Logan to go to the toilet, which is like much harder than you would think. Like, of all these bizarro things I've done, like the toilet training, man, that's like a real difficult thing to do, man. Teaching a domesticated primate how to use a toilet, man, it's rough. So like I definitely have, like I'm a very goal driven person, you know, so I think it's important to have that stuff. Otherwise, with the way I grew up, I can definitely just kind of slide into nihilism and apathy very easily. So I think it's good to have those goals. And I definitely like long-term goals. Like one day I would love to get my black belt, you know, like not that I think it's even important, but it's just a good lifelong goal to have at some point that I know is going to orient me across the kind of span of my life.
Yeah.
But there's definitely more important things at the moment. And I think once again, that's where, you know, reflection and accountability is going to come into that. Like I've recently just stopped working just so I can spend more time with Logie, just so I can be at home and do that important stuff.
I think it is important. If we just go down that like black belt route for a second, I think it's important that you have goals that are maybe like, if it was selfish versus selfless, if you maybe have those goals that are more selfish, it's like, no, I've always wanted this. I've always wanted to be a black belt. And regardless if it's important in kind of like commas to you in comparison to like life, a lifelong thing, I think it is important because it's something that you've worked towards. You got up to a brown belt, I believe, and that's a very high level. And what was it? Sorry, was it brown? Purple belt? And that's a great standard. And you know, that's however many years in, and I'm not sure how many more years you think it's going to take. You know, and there's no real like timeline for that. And but it could be a lifelong thing. Like you see 15, 60-year-olds getting their black belt sometimes, but I think it is important to have those things, regardless if it's in comparison to like, you know, again, you're a nihilistic bloke, but regardless if it's important to this lifelong mortality, I mean, it's probably not, but it's something that you want to work towards, and it's something that's going to keep you on the right track, at least for the next 10 years, at least for that long.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. And you can't just be like 100% selfless all the time. Like, don't get me wrong. Like I definitely have, I can feel the priority at the moment is being a parent, because I've got this like tiny little defenseless boy, you know, that understands nothing about the world, man. Like, and I don't mean this in a mean way, but like toddlers are hopeless, man. They're just ridiculous. Like, it's really like funny being a parent. And you kind of like recognize, oh, all right, all this stuff about me is not that important right now, but you still need it. You know, you still need stuff for yourself. You still need your own identity. You still need to, like, you can't take care of people unless you're taking care of yourself first. You know, it's like you kind of both have to have that. Like, what's the metaphor for it? Like I heard someone explain once that the best way a relationship can be is when you both have food, because you can feed each other. But if someone doesn't have it, someone's going to starve, you know, or both of you are going to starve. Yeah. So I think you have to have those goals for yourself. And I also have to recognize that, like, all right, well, there's going to be a point in my life as well where Logie doesn't need me anymore, because he's going to be older or at school or doing whatever he's going to do, or an adult, you know, as much as I don't want to acknowledge that he's going to be an adult one day.
Crazy.
Like my life is going to continue then. And maybe these things that were at the forefront of my life and have kind of gone into the background will be back up in front. And, you know, like everyone needs to do something. Everyone needs their own journey. Everyone needs to challenge themselves as well.
I think people just slip into that 9 to 5 kind of mentality so quickly.
So quickly.
I think it's because they don't know what that is. Like, they don't know what they're chasing. And that's okay. Like, you know, like you said, like it's important that everyone has it, but not everyone has it. Like, not everyone goes out there and goes, yeah, I can guarantee I'm 40 and this is what I want to do, and what I've always been doing, what I want to do the rest of my life. And shit pops up, like travel or fucking pandemics or whatever that steers you off course. Or, you know, we're just lucky that by the sounds of it, the three of us know that we've got a passion that we do enjoy and things that we want to pursue for a very, very, very long time. But not everyone has that, and that's why the slip into the 9 to 5. It's not a slip. It's just like, well, what's the alternative? Like, they don't know. They don't know.
What is the alternative? Like, and if you have just gone through the whole kind of I guess the social conditioning of like public school, high school, into uni, get a job out at 21, and then suddenly you're just on this like, you know,
rat race.
The rat race, you know, as much as it's like a cliche, it's so true. Like I've done the whole 9 to 5 thing before. And it's so easy to fall into it. Like it's so easy just to get in this habit of like 5 days on, 2 days off, 5 days on, 2 days off, 5 days on, 2 days off. And like, whoa, like years have gone by, you know, and if you're not someone who's remotely passionate about stuff or interested in things, like that's not a bad thing either. Like if you look at the Myers-Briggs personality test, my wife and I remember this years ago, we were looking at like the person that makes up like 25% of the population. And it's like, they like routines. They like to do the same things. They like to be given direction. They are not very interested in talking about abstract ideas. Like there's a big, like a quarter of society is this person that's like, well, that works really well for them, you know? And it's like, maybe someone like me who has struggled so hard at some point in my life to find a thread of meaning is like doubling down on it. But someone like that who's kind of come from a family that's good, you know, they haven't had trauma, they've had a good life, they're cruising along. And, you know, that's not to say that's a bad thing that they're working their 9 to 5 and they're happy doing it. But, you know, for some people, we're going to need to dig a little bit deeper for that thread of meaning.
I think that the perspective or the viewpoint from someone that works a 9 to 5 is that those who aren't working 9 to 5 have potentially a cruisier lifestyle. And I would warn that it is not cruisier. It is far more demanding, especially for those that want to set themselves up long term. You've got to work when people are not working. Like that, that's the whole idea. Like speaking from a fitness perspective, we get people that apply for roles all the time or get in the industry, and it's like, I've got to work. Well, I've got to work 5 till 10:30, and then I've got to come back and work like 4 till 8. It's like, well, yeah, that's your 9-hour shift or 8 hours. You do that 4 days, 5 days a week. It's like, oh, but what do I do during the midday? Oh, we've got to write your programming and you've got to check in with your clients. And it's like, oh, so I'm working 60 hours a week? Yeah. Like, that's what you got to do if you want to make it in the industry. So I think it's like people like, you know, they can work from the beach or they can work from a cafe or whatever. And that's seen to be the luxury life. But while other people are at home watching Married at First Sight, thinking their life's the ducks nuts, there's other people pushing. And I think perspective is everything. I don't know if you guys have seen, there's an image of perspective and you got a guy on either side of something in between them, and it's a 6 to one of them and it's a 9 to the other. So both of them are correct, but it's just a matter of where you're standing. And I think that's the biggest thing to be wary of, because I do hear a lot of people that do work that 9 to 5 grind. It's like, oh, you're in fitness, that must be, you know, really, really, you know, your work life must be amazing. And I'm like, yeah, it is, because I make an effort to make sure that my life and my work are amazing. But I work and then I live, like, and the time that I get to live isn't as much as you, but I just do more with it because it's so precious, potentially.
The grass is always greener, isn't it? Like people 100%. Are so quick to just think like, that must be the life, you know?
Yeah.
Like I look back at the few years that I was like running my own business, and it was like, and working as well to support it while I started. Like, mate, I was grinding. I was going so hard. But people, like when clients would come in, they'd be like, this must be great, you know, just like hanging out training people all day. Like, well, you know, there's a lot more than just training people. But we're so quick to... Pardon?
Whenever anyone says that, like, oh man, you must live the dream, I just agree with them.
I'm like,
absolutely. To be honest, you
don't disagree. No,
yeah.
Like,
no chance.
Yeah.
And you can almost trick yourself if you repeat it enough times. Well, to be honest, I actually do. I mean, I love what I do. Like, I seriously have like the best job. And I wouldn't say it's cruisy, but I mean, I was up at 4 this morning, which is pretty early, but I go in and I see highly motivated people that are there at 5 o'clock, ready to go. And then, you know, I train 3 groups, and then I get breakfast and I can sit at the cafe and do some programming, train another group. And then young Tom comes in and then I get to say good day to him. And then, and then I got footy tonight, and I have footy every night with the 2 teams that come through. So I just totally agree. Like, it seriously is, like, it is a grind, but I feel like I seriously love it. So for me, it's not that hard.
Yeah, if the juice is worth the squeeze, you'll do it, you know?
Yeah, for sure. But I'm also not doing a job on top of what I do right now. You know, I don't run the gym, but I run 3 mornings a week. But owning the gym and then doing this S&C kind of side hustle, that keeps me busy enough, but not so busy that I can't chase more passions, you know, more things that I want to work on. And I'm just like a hyper motivated individual, I suppose. You know, I really want the next thing and I'm like desperate for success. Not that I'm not successful, but I'm nowhere near where I want to be. And I remember I was watching Naval, I believe is Indian, is a billionaire, and one of the things he says is the 2 most dangerous things that you can do is working 9 to 5 and heroin. And I remember my mate Ethan telling me about this guy, and that was one of his first quotes that just like kind of stuck with me, and yeah, so true. And I swore when I bought this gym that I would never, unless it's by my own business, I would never be employed by someone else again. I'm just, you know, there's more to trading like an hour of your time for $35. You know, there's so much more that you can do with your time. I think if you have a product that is worth something and you make it scalable, then there's no reason why you can't just like create something, you know? So it was kind of like a long tangent on, I just agree with people when they say I live the dream. I seriously do. Like I'm surrounded by motivated people all the time, whether they're athletes in the gym or athletes at footy on the track. Yeah, it's seriously good.
Well, isn't it funny that people think of like people always associate with the dream that there's not going to be any work involved, you know, that it's like, that must be great. You just don't do anything and it all turns up. It's awesome, you know, but that seems like such a hollow existence to me. Like that grind is where the meaning comes from, you know. Once again, positive emotion is associated with a goal. So like, why would you want that? You know, like you want to find a goal that's worth dying for. You know, you want to find something that's worth absolutely grinding yourself to nothing over, because that's where the sense of worth and achievement is going to come from in the first place.
Yeah, 100%. Anyway. When because I've just had 10 days off, I got COVID. Because I didn't have a routine. I mean, for the first 4 days, I was sleeping 20 hours a day. I was ruined. But after that, I just kind of like got into the monotony of waking up at 9 o'clock or getting out of bed at 10 and then just like hanging out and watching YouTube and sleep a little bit and then, you know, back onto YouTube and then sleeping a bit more. But then waking up this morning, I'm like so motivated. I'm like, finally, I'm back into work. Like I'm waking up early and I'm doing something and I'm, you know, around people and yeah, spending 10 days by yourself when you're like so unwell like that is pretty rough. Because I'm just, you know, I really want that next thing. Like, and I can't do that just by sitting at home. Like there's only so much you can do. There's only so much networking and content creation and post scheduling that you can do. You know, when you're sitting at home on, you know, on the computer for 15 hours a day or whatever. I'm like, man, thank God I'm back into work now. A bit of routine.
Isn't it funny how like humans need structure? Like,
oh yeah. I'm crazy for it.
But no, and I can guarantee for those like, no, I don't need structure. I'm a free spirit or whatever. Just they just need less structure. Like every human needs structure. You can't just wander the realms and not have that. And it's funny you notice it so like, because I'm a very regimented human. I'm sure those that know me will be nodding their heads absolutely. But like it's funny, as soon as it goes, I remember speaking to a mentor, this is back at uni, and I go, I really struggle with when something comes at me sideways. I take forever to get back on that path. And I couldn't think of an example right now, but I remember thinking that as 10 years ago, 23, 22. I'm not that old, 9 years ago, 8 years ago, sheesh. And it was just like, so I knew that it was a problem. And we've spoken about this before, Luke, with like momentum and that sort of stuff. But it's funny how you have those days, or that, you know, even holidays. In holidays, you're just like, you're planning and you come out, fuck it, when I come back to work, I'm just gonna have all this. I'm gonna wake up at 5, I'm gonna race out of bed, I'm gonna do my yoga, go for a run, come back, it's gonna be 20 past 5. I've already done 10Ks in 20 minutes. Like you just have all this energy to just plan all this shit. And then reality hits. And for some, it's like, oh, none of that happened and I'm back in the grind. Yep. But for others, it's like, fuck yeah, give me the structure. Like I need it back.
Yeah, that's me. Actually, Jordan Peterson, I heard a recent thing from him about this, that the perfect amount of the perfect amount of freedom, or the perfect level of freedom, is not having no structure where you can just go and do whatever, because then nothing will happen. The perfect amount of freedom actually comes from a certain level of structure that keeps you in line and keeps you doing stuff like at a certain pace, you know. And I'm a big testament to that. Like if I don't have structure, then nothing gets done, you know. But I could be so much busier, and I get so much more done, even though I've got all this other stuff I have to juggle at the same time, because I've got structure. And it just makes so much sense to me. And yeah, the way he explains it is just perfect. Like it's not having nothing. That is not freedom. Freedom is actually having some structure, a little bit of structure that keeps you in this groove of doing stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like even looking at these, the sort of people that don't have a real kind of like rigid structure on paper, you know, it's like that saying, out of order comes chaos, and out of chaos, the secret order. So even people with like a really chaotic life, it's like, well, that's its own kind of ordering system. It's not like there's nothing. It's not like there's just this vacuum or a void that you're living in. Like one of my best friends that I played in bands with, he's like a real hippie van life kind of guy. And like we've always been like yin and yang, you know, like I've always just been like, I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. and train, and then I'm going to have breakfast, and I'm going to do this thing. And that's when I'm happiest, you know, when I've got that, like in sociology, they call it like a neurological grid, like this template for your life that you're going to come to reality with to orient yourself. But for him, it's like he just wants to do bits and pieces, but that's an order of its own. You know, like this guy kind of just takes a real jazzy improv approach to life, where it's like, well, I'm going to go and jump in the water, and then maybe I'll go and busk for a few hours, and then after that I'll have a coffee, and then I'll go and do this thing. But it's not like there's no order, you know, it's just a different way of approaching it. It's a different strategy. And I think like the real difference is that like the more open you are, the more you move laterally across ideas versus the more closed off you are, you're going to be much more linear, like up and down versus left and right. So like these super open, free going people, it's like, well, there's a structure. You're just moving laterally across all this stuff and kind of traveling where life takes you, as opposed to someone who's going to have a real dutiful approach of like maybe how we all kind of look more at our life, of like, this is what I'm going to do today and tomorrow and in a week and a month and in 4 years and in 8 years. But it's still structure. You can't avoid it. Like it's a bizarre thing about humans that we fall into it naturally. You know, it's an archetypal thing. It's in the structure of our psyche.
I wonder what we were doing structurally when we were hunters and gatherers. I mean, I'm sure it's like, I mean, there's obviously not, all right, it's 7:30. That means we've got to go hunt the boar now. Obviously there's none of that, but it's like, maybe there's like some other type of,
it'd be seasonal for sure. Like they do it off the sun, they do it off the weather. They go, cool, well, like the rain's just happened, so therefore that means this, or like, they would anticipate based on seasons and weather for sure.
100%. There's a lot to do. Like one of the biggest goals I've kind of got at the moment is growing food. And it's been something that I've been like getting more and more into over the past few years. Because I also like, I kind of semi grew up with my grandparents that like, I spent a lot of time with them, and they had like a big property. My granddad like grew his own food, raised his own meat, all this sort of stuff. So I grew up around a lot of that sort of stuff. And as I've become a dad, I've kind of like fallen back into it as like, I guess looking at like the patriarch of my life and what he did and how he did stuff. And I've been learning a lot about it. I'm not that good at it, you know, but I'm learning. And you're totally tied to whatever is happening in nature. You know, so maybe you're going to be tied more to sun up, sundown, and to the seasons, and to if there's rain or if there's sun. You know, there's going to be different things to do every day. So once again, we probably look at those hunter-gatherer people as like, that would have been great. You were just hanging out, doing nothing, eating berries and sitting on rocks and looking up at the sun. But they were probably working their asses off nonstop.
Drawing on the rocks, going, okay, sun here means this now. Like all the Egyptians had it down pat, hey, doing their hieroglyphs and sussing it out.
There's something that like kind of is attractive about that though, isn't there?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
What is it? Is it because it's like ingrained in us to just go and like throw spears and stuff, or what?
I think it's archetypal, you know. I think that's the foundation that everything else is built on. Like from a Jungian perspective, like he talks about like the world tree as this really, really deep archetype within the unconscious. And, that probably comes from when we were just monkeys living in a tree. And the tree was what oriented us to the world for however many hundreds of millions of years. I don't know much about evolution, but I think there's always this, you could probably look at it in your own lifespan as well. You're always looking backwards at the last time something made sense. You're always looking back to when you're in a crisis, you generally are thinking about past relationships or past jobs you had or past something that reality was ordered and everything was going well and it's all good, and I think we probably do this on a macro level, looking back at nature gave us everything we needed. Everything was plentiful. Yeah, there were challenges, but it all made sense because we were living in the most kind of natural, holistic sort of way, and I think there's a part of us that's trying to get back all the time.
Yeah, it seems that way.
Yeah, it takes away from the corporate structure as well. You've got ties to the land or whatever that is, which is very innate in a lot of indigenous communities and that sort of stuff, which is why land is so what's it called, valuable, I guess, because you're tied to that. So whatever heritage, I think, Luke, you're from the UK, I'm not sure where you're from, Cam, I'm from Italy, we're tied back to that culture and lifestyle. So when you go back to growing food or something that's so innate, something that's so natural, it's that's so primal because it's part of who we reference our identity off. As opposed to the reason I like to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning is purely because I get an extra hour every day compared to those that get up at 6. If I do that 365 days, I get 365 extra hours. Divide that by 24, I get you're creating a structure for yourself. You're trying to beat something, you're trying to grow and be better than something. Whereas if you do something according to nature, you're limited. You can only be so good. Because you can only get to an end goal. It's a fixed variable. It's completely variable. But the fixed nature of it being, weather, Mother Nature, is attractive.
I agree. I wonder how important it is. I mean, we're all from. Have you said what your lineage is, Cam? Where's all your family from?
So my dad's side of the family was all English. My mum's side of the family is all German.
Okay, cool. I wonder how important or how much difference it makes. So let's use Tom, for example, Italian background, lives in Australia. I wonder how much of his DNA, if any, if there's a percentage or what, is kind of used to the Italian way, used to that side of the world, used to that kind of climate. And now he's living in Australia. It's that it's not optimal for him based off of where his, thousands and thousands of years of worth of ancestors are from. I wonder if that makes any difference.
I think 100%. It's probably not a very trendy thing to say because I guess with a kind of, what would you say, postmodernist sort of worldview and cultural relativity, we're not going to look at certain cultures as better than others. But there's definitely, I think, a natural culture that we come from. We've all kind of been stripped from the motherland. And we are a biological organism that has sprung out of the organism of the earth. I like the term biota, the sum totality of biological life that we kind of spring out of. And I think that's going to affect our psyche. I don't think you can just rip people away from hundreds and hundreds of years of a collective culture and plonk them in the middle of nowhere. We can look in our own backyard and see the effect that that's had on the Indigenous people within this country, which is something I'm really passionate about, but we don't ever really look at ourselves as that's a same sort of effect. Could we keep this kind of social game going in the same sort of way if we were oriented in the culture that we came from? I don't think you could. I think culture is something that's deep within our biology, and you can't just plonk someone else in you can't put someone else in a different geographic area and sever that connection to where they came from. We're tied to our biology and where we come from, I think, anyway.
Yeah, I can see the relationship with that. Not that I love the cold. coincidentally. I don't know if that's like a UK thing or what. And I'm also extremely pale, which is probably a UK thing. But yeah, I can see how that would make a big difference, I think. And you can see how maybe if we go down the route of like nutrition and like blood type diets and what your ancestors were used to eating and you know, and then there's ethical decisions that come into that as well. Like you're a vegetarian, for example, and all of your ancestors probably grew up eating meat, but then you have like the ethics of that come into it, and like the emotional side of things that come into that. Do you think there's an optimal diet for every person?
I don't really know, you know, like I really can't say that I've got an educated opinion on it. Like I've read those books, Eat Right for Your Type and all that sort of stuff. And at one point I thought that was a really sort of valid idea. But I guess if you're like going down generations of biology and you're used to certain stresses within a landscape, like probably it would make sense to me that if, you know, like if eating in tune with the season is better for your body, which a lot of people will argue is true, then surely eating in tune with the biological rhythm of generations is also important as well. Like, because certain things grow in certain areas at certain times.
Yeah.
And if you're coming from that, like I think that would be legitimate. And definitely the choices you make would be tied to that culture too. Like maybe if I was, I don't know, in the German hills, maybe I wouldn't be a vegetarian, you know?
Yeah, maybe not. So, okay, we said evolution before. I want to go down this route. We were once, if you believe this, monkeys swinging in the trees. What was the turning point? Like, how did we, I mean, we're on Zoom right now. We're all wearing headphones, like communicating. We're all in SA, which isn't so far, but it's instant. You know, the pixels from the camera are like picking me up and they're being shot through the sky somehow, and they're ending up in your lounge rooms or shed, or you're probably sitting at the dining table right now, Tom. Like, how do we go from that to this?
Oh, man, good question. Good question.
In your opinion?
In my opinion, it's hard to say, you know, like I really don't have many like belief systems. I think the best abbreviation for belief system is BS, you know, like it's easy to change an idea. It's very hard to change a belief system. Mm-hmm. And I think we always overestimate what we know, even like, you know, all it takes for like a fact to become opinion is 10 years. So I could see like a lot of different arguments. Like obviously, like we've talked a lot about the whole McKenna stoned ape theory. You know, when I was maybe 23 or 24, of course it's got to be that. You know, that has to be it.
Do you want to actually explain what that is? Just for, I mean, that's like very esoteric. You and I know what that is, Tom. I don't know. I'm not sure if you know what that is.
No idea. Never heard of a stoned ape.
Do you mind?
Have you heard of Terence McKenna?
Rings a bell.
So Terence McKenna was kind of like I guess you'd say a counterculture figure of the kind of like 70s, 80s, 90s in America, but more 80s and 90s. And he spoke on psychedelics. He was an ethnobotanist, and he went across to the Amazon, and he was actually like a butterfly capturer guy. And while he was there, he experimented with psychedelics, ayahuasca, psilocybin mushrooms, all this sort of stuff. So he was like one of the prominent figures in the counterculture who brought this to the West. And he wrote a lot of books. Like his most famous book is called, what was it, True Hallucinations? Okay. And it's about his experiments with colossal doses of psilocybin mushrooms. Like McKenna is where we get this idea of a heroic dose. He wrote a lot about that. His whole, I guess you could say, his little tagline was five dried grams in silent darkness. And he was a counterculture figure who brought like psilocybin mushrooms to prominence. And the stoned ape theory is his idea that at some point we as like primates would have found psilocybin mushrooms because they're very easily identifiable and they grow around the bases of trees a lot of the time. So his idea was that when we were like monkeys in Africa and the rainforest was drying up, we would have been forced out of the trees to find food. And that at some point we would have come into like interaction with psilocybin mushrooms, which at high doses can induce spiritual experience, psychedelic experiences, and like his argument was glossolalia, that it will make you speak in tongues, and that is where language comes from, and the development of language made the brain just massively expand in a really short period of time, which like having that experience myself, I can totally, and anyone who's done it, you know, can definitely agree, because like I've had very bizarre, what would you say, mystical experiences, spiritual experiences, and I see those as like the foundation of religion. I think there was definitely a time where shamanism was prominent in human culture. So the idea of the stoned ape theory, that's where a massive expansion in creativity, language would have happened. And, you know, like there's a lot of things that at small doses as well, like you can get better audio and visual acuity. Like people that microdose often talk about being able to see things better, to hear things better. And the idea is that if these monkeys were showering down, they would have been the ones who survived, and that would have created some sort of culture. So like I could see that. And then there's also the argument of like fire, you know, and cooking meat. And so it's hard to say, you know. What do you guys think?
I have zero knowledge on that. I genuinely have no idea. I was actually brought up quite religious, so that was my brainwashing until mid-adolescence. And since then, I'm more worried about why we're here rather than how we got here. So, don't really have 2 cents to give. I'm just like, okay, I'm here now. Haven't really thought about the past. I know the past forms who we are, I guess, a part of that. But I wouldn't have a educated guess as to that evolution.
Luke? I agree, because I think there's this huge existential problem with it, right? Like Kierkegaard, who's a Danish philosopher, is an existentialist, and he said that the pain of life is that it only makes sense backwards, but we have to live it forwards. And like you could take that idea further and say that life existentially is kind of like driving down the road with no windscreen, and all you've got is a rear view mirror. And the only reason you would use it is because it's better to use that than nothing at all.
Yeah.
You know? So there was a time in my life where I probably like look back and think of like, wow, this is how we got here. But now it's like, I don't know, maybe it's being a dad or something like that. I'm looking forward a lot more than I am kind of like looking backwards with wonder, I guess.
I think it's so hard to think forwards by looking backwards because it's seen as so different to what we are now. Like, I mean, if we're looking millions of years ago, obviously very different, but even 100 years ago, like the 1920s, dude, like what was life like then?
That progression intrigues me more than what happened like 1900s to now. Maybe even like that in terms of progression. I like all history in terms of like isolated moments in time to research and educate. But the progression of like, we've literally been to the moon. What is it? 60. I got this maths wrong the other day, like 60 years ago. Haven't been back in 60 years or whatever it is. But we've created all X, Y, and Z in 60 years. Like that's not a lot. Like parents are 60 years old, not mine, but some are. Sorry, folks, if you're listening, you're definitely not 60. That impresses me, that rapid speed of intelligence when it comes to information technology, like the whole IT age, basically.
I completely agree. Like it's, you know, we live in, and that's the thing, we live in potentially the most interesting time there has ever been to be a human. Like that change from like monkey on the African plains to now, you know, I feel like that's nothing compared to, you know, like late 1800s, late 1900s up until now. Like how strange, what a weird time to find ourselves in, you know. It's so odd. Like you were saying before with communicating, like how are we doing this?
Yeah.
On this magic screen, you know, we're all in different parts of Adelaide, we just communicate like that. Like
it's bizarre, isn't it? The innovation must come from somewhere. Like maybe that's an innate part of the human race is to innovate.
Elon.
And because everything is so intertwined now, everyone is so connected with each other technologically. Now there's such a challenge between people everywhere to be the next Elon Musk or the next Nikola Tesla, or
I think it's all about
maybe that's
leveling up, like you say, innovation for sure, but it's a competition. Like it was, you know, going back to the moon landing, that stopped as soon as someone got there. Cool, someone's done it now. What's next? Like, oh, someone's made an electric car. Cool, what's next? Like, make it more efficient. Yeah, but what's beyond that? People are already probably developing the next, easy mode of transport. So it's a case of, I think it's less about, like, go back to the world wars. They were trying to create nuclear bombs, something that had never been done. So it's literally trying to produce something that we don't even know about yet. And that's what, like, the spear, when that was created, then everyone had a spear. It's like, what about when I get close? I need a sword. What about a gun, like gunpowder? What about automatic rifles? What about like that, going back to the real primal, fighting over land sort of innovation? And now it's an IT age. So what's the next? Fuck knows. But like, I think it's that. It's a competition. Everything's competition.
What's that saying? Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
And like, you look at there's a socio-cultural kind of background to why these things happen as well. Like, you talk about the moon landing. Well, that comes out of the Cold War, so all these things, like what's happening in society is also going to dictate what is being invented, or like where we go next. And like, it's actually another McKenna thing that he talks about a lot, was he used to see, this is in one of his talks at some point, he talks about like information technology being like a sort of crystalline structure, and that like the stress of the biological organism of society, of humans, is going to reach a point where, like, the collective stress of the Cold War sent someone to the moon. It kind of reaches a higher level and a higher system of order. So like, as things turn up in society and as things get tough, like the World War, out of that comes all of this innovation. Yeah. So like maybe as, we're getting backed into a corner right now in terms of the climate and stuff like that. So we're going to have to find a way to get past this stuff at some point. And maybe out of that stress on the organism as a whole, innovation will come. So I guess like there's that element as well, the socio-cultural, which is like my real passion of like looking at culture and society and seeing how that is affecting where we head.
Where do you see this kind of bursting out into? We're under so much pressure right now, and 60 years ago it was the moon landing. In which direction do you think it's backwards? Like maybe we go to our roots, or is it so far forwards that we're now delving into like Neuralink, and we're uploading our consciousness onto the cloud, and we can all just like live in this metaverse?
It's funny you mentioned that, because one of my best friends, one of my old training partners, I remember we were hanging out at his lives on a property in Harnsdorf, and we were hanging out on the top of like a little hilltop. We just trained out there, like in his shed, and we were talking about where we saw society heading, and this is like 8 years ago. And he was saying like, man, I feel like we're going to get to this point where there's a real divergent split, and there's going to be some people who join a fake constructed world, and like people like us, we're just going to be doing jiu-jitsu and surfing and blah, blah, blah. And I think it's legitimate. I think you can see a real kind of transhumanist agenda, which is like, you look into like Ray Kurzweil and all these kind of like technological singularity people, and the Neuralink, which terrifies me, like I'm this real like organic mung bean kind of person that's just like, no, like you grow your food, you live with nature, you train, you do all these like archaic primal kind of things. And I think like it's so hard to say, but it's divergent, because there's a lot of people looking back and a lot of people looking forward. And some people are looking forward to this like transhumanist, Elon Musk is going to save the world and take us to Mars and give us Neuralink. And there's also a lot of people who are so skeptical of that and are saying like, no, we've got to go backwards. And I guess like I shifted a lot when I became a parent, because you start to recognize that like, well, the structure of society is the family, and like it's lots of families that tie in to make a global community. So I'm definitely like, I'm on the other side of the fence, man. Like I would love to get rid of my cellular prison, and just go back to living life, man. Like if it all kind of fell apart, like I'd be part of that community, I think. Like I'd be looking to grow food and hang out and do pull-ups or something. But yeah, like it's hard to say, it's going both ways at the moment. What's going to pop first? Like what do you guys think? Where do you think we're heading?
I think unfortunately probably towards the technological age.
No.
Yeah.
Numbers speak, that's all. Like just numbers speak. So IT, I don't say I agree with it, but I feel like I'm in alignment with Luke. I feel like the IT world is taking over.
Oh yeah, I think it's definitely taking over.
Yeah.
It's a force. You know, you look at the last 50 years of history and what's happened. There's this inertia pushing us towards it. You know, like it's going to be very, very hard to escape. And those who don't kind of fit into it, you know, it's not going to be easy. Like even if you look in our own backyard, just from the perspective of Australia, like the digital identity and all this stuff that's being rolled out, like we're becoming like a kind of like a smart grid. You know, humans are going to be like, we can barely put our phones down. There's a part of it that's kind of like this, almost like a symbiotic relationship with technology now, where we just can't get away from it. Like we're having this conversation on the internet, you know, like this is the way we do it. It's just the way things are. So it's kind of like I look at my son and like the idea of like limiting screen time or something like that. Like, yeah, you have to do that, obviously. But then also like, well, the world he's going to live in, there's this huge push towards technology. Like things are going to be radically different in 10 to 15 years time. And I think you guys are right. You know, like I think there's always going to be these people who are like looking backwards at hunter-gatherers going like, wasn't that great? You know, like that are wanting to go back in that direction. But there's a huge pull towards the technology. Like it's hard to detach yourself from it. Like,
yeah, it feels like there's no happy medium. Like it's like you're either one or you're the other.
Yes.
Like, and you've got to be jarringly either.
Whereas I think like the happy medium was probably like a backhoe or something, you know, like, you know, we've gone past the medium a long time ago.
100%.
Should we
let's have a quick pause.
Take a quick pause? Great. Yeah, man, speak from the heart.
All right, we're back. I actually kind of wanted to maybe make a little bit of a tangent, because I know one of the reasons that Luke, we wanted you on is around sort of conspiracy theories. And I did have some questions, and I'm curious about, you're obviously a very educated individual and well-read, and coming from that psychology perspective. So I definitely am curious. Probably the first thing will be maybe like, what would you define as a conspiracy? Like what does conspiracy mean? And therefore, like from there, what would be your top few conspiracies that you believe that society, like that you strongly believe in, that society should really take notice on?
And this is the thing, I should have a disclaimer as well. You know, like I think I'm a collector of conspiracies more than anything. Okay. Like once again, like I don't think you should believe everything. I doubt everything. Doubt that you even have the capacity to doubt everything, you know, because it's so easy to get like hijacked by stuff. And like it's such a bizarre culture. Like it's such a bizarre culture. And I really fell into like the whole conspiracy side of things because I couldn't go to school. Like when I was like, that was one of these things when I was like 16, I got bashed so badly that I couldn't go to school anymore. So I was doing homeschooling and it was all online. And at the time, YouTube was like not censored, man. I was like 15 or 16, looking up all this bizarre stuff between classes. And I really have always been like interested in that path. And, you know, like Terence McKenna and stuff like that, you got to take that with a pinch of salt. Like that guy is like, he's not like whatever it means to be a conspiracy theorist. Like the term itself is constructed by the CIA. And that came out of so many people starting to look into the JFK conspiracy. Yeah. You know, which is like, I think that's the real like smoking gun. Like if anyone's going to look backwards, look back to that because it's shady. Like the whole thing is bizarre. Yeah. The Warren Report and the magic bullet theory and all this sort of stuff. Oswald saying he was a patsy and then getting shot by Jack Ruby. Like there's lots of stuff to do there where it's like, this does not make any sense. You know, this doesn't make sense. And that's kind of like, I think that's where this whole movement has sprung out of. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to define a conspiracy, I don't know. I guess like the way people see that now is that the narrative that's provided by culture is not the correct one. You know, like a conspiracy as a word means that you think there's a group of kind of nefarious individuals conspiring to commit some sort of offense, which if you look back through history, you know, history is kind of a history of conspiracies, of people working against each other and revolutions. And like, you know, was the Bolshevik Revolution a conspiracy? Yeah. 100%.
What's that?
Like you have to, the Bolshevik Revolution.
Sorry, I'm so naive, man.
It's the Russian Revolution where the Bolsheviks overthrew the Tsars. which is that they conspired, you know, they got together in a political movement and they had Red October and they overthrew, and then communism was in Russia until what? Soviet Union collapsed in 93.
Yeah.
So that's a conspiracy.
Yeah.
You know, like it's hard to say.
So what are some common like you say, JFK assassination? I think that's pretty well known as, like, you know, pretty jarring. You know, a lot of people don't believe the general narrative. What would be some others that you're kind of like, people need to potentially wake up?
It's hard to say, you know, like I really, like I said, I kind of don't believe in anything personally, but I entertain things because I find it entertaining.
Yeah, for sure.
But what conspiracies?
Like, is the world flat?
Is the world flat? Well, that's the thing. You got to look into it. Eric Spay says the world is flat. Like Eddie Bravo says the world is flat. And why are they saying it? You know, it's not like, and once again, I'm not married to the globe, but I'm not sure if we're living on a flat plane or a sphere or whatever. You know, empirically in my life, I would have to commit to belief. There would be a point where my knowledge fails and I would commit to faith on either side. You know, because that's what you don't know, you believe, and what you believe, you don't know. Because it's two different acts, you know, it's two different actions. So, like, I find the flat Earth stuff very entertaining to look at because it's challenged. It's not like the whole time it's been going on, people have been challenging Copernicus, and who knows? Who knows where we're living?
What's the rationale for wanting to know the shape of the Earth, and what's the rationale for hiding or lying about it?
And I was talking to one of my friends about this yesterday because, like, the way I see it, right, is where, like, we live in a physical space. We are somewhere where we exist. We have a sense of being here, wherever here is, regardless of the shape of where it is. But there's also, like, I think we occupy more of a metaphysical, interpersonal kind of space because you don't exist on an island. You know, you exist in relationship to other people. Yeah. So the primary world that I think we really live in is the interpersonal world of, like, getting along with people, you know, which a lot of the time this stuff is kind of counterintuitive for. So what is the point? Why does it matter? You know, I was having this conversation yesterday because I've, like, I haven't spoken much about it, but I was involved with music for a long time too. Like, I toured music, I played in bands. So I've been a part of a lot of, like, cultures. I've always been a bit of an outsider. Like, when I was doing martial arts, I always felt like I was more of a muso, and then I'd hang out with my muso friends and be like, oh, well, I'm a bit more like a sporto guy. And I go and hang out with powerlifters and be like, oh, actually, no, maybe I'm like something else. And then I go and hang out with academics and be like, well, I'm not this, you know. And so I've always been like this outsider, and I've been influenced by a lot of people. So I've got a lot of, like, real full-on conspiracy theorist friends, and who I love very dearly. And like, we're at the point now where, like, what does it matter? You know, like, if everyone, like, say there is this grand conspiracy, you know, and, like, it goes so far. Some people think that, like, it's a Jesuit conspiracy, you know, and some people think that NASA is this occupational government that are actually running stuff. Like, that's the whole Alex Jones line of things, that there's, like, they're actually a shadow government who are pulling all the strings. And like, there's so many different camps, and they're all arguing between themselves as well. So it's like, let's say the Earth is flat, right? The world is flat. This realm, wherever we live, is a flat plane. Like, there's this guy, Santos Bonacci, and I like him because he's an Australian ex-muso guy, and he takes a real kind of, like, spiritual, metaphysical look at this sort of stuff. And he thinks we're living in, like, a torus field, like a you know how we've got, like, an electromagnetic charge in our heart. We've got a small frequency that we emit, and that apparently comes out of this torus field, which is like, you can see it across nature when you look at the shape of an apple, or you look at, it's like this fractal pattern, you know. So he thinks we're living on this, like, central plane of inertia in this torus field. So let's say we're living there, you know, which I don't think we are. But we all agree, everyone wakes up and everyone understands, like, okay, this is the world we're living on now, it's flat. Well, we still, like, you know, Biden said to NATO that Russia's going to invade the Ukraine potentially tomorrow. So like we could be at World War III by the end of the week, and the shape of the Earth is not really going to matter all that much. Like it's so what's the point? What does it matter? I think there are definitely like some things that are worth looking into, like say the Gulf of Tonkin, like the Gulf of Tonkin being a false flag which brought everyone into Vietnam. That's a conspiracy you should look at because it affects our lives and the structure that we live in. And like it's legitimate. It's legitimate. It was a fake attack, and it brought us into this war. Or like the biggest one of our generation is probably 9/11. Was 9/11 an inside job? Well, I can't say for sure, but you start looking into the details of it, like, and World Trade Center 7, like most people think 2 buildings came down that day when there were 3. And that is something that has a real effect, like that affects us. One of the main contributors, one of the owners of the World Trade Center is also the dude who owns Westfield. So like the guy who's got a vested interest in Marion Shopping Center also had a vested interest in the World Trade Centers collapsing because they made a lot of money out of the insurance. So it's like, I think there's a point where it just loses all kind of relevance to our life, Do
you think there will always be that though? Like there will always be 2 sides. So and do you think, obviously there will always be 2 sides. There's always going to be someone that argues against the narrative for sure. And it's finding enough of a thread to pull, I guess. And obviously, you see all the WikiLeaks and all that sort of stuff about people trying to be silenced for pulling the right threads. And I suppose that's why we have it. Like we have it to create conversation and create awareness, and to not believe what you're fed to believe, but, form your own opinions and that sort of stuff. And that creates more self-aware beings, I guess. It's
I think a lot of the time it's kind of like a false dichotomy as well. It's like you're saying before, it's this like the 2 people looking on either side of the 6 and 9, and they'll both see different things. It's like, well, there's a sense that in some way things are true and false at the same time. And I think you could extrapolate that further and say they're true, false, and meaningless all at once. There comes a point where it's like, well, what we know has to have relevance to the life and like the interpersonal life that we live in. Like I could look into all these conspiracies, but it's not necessarily going to make me a better parent or make my squat go up. So like that's where it comes back to like, all right, well, what like
and they're the only 2 things that matter: better parenting and better squats.
Yeah. The two primary dimensions of my life.
Exactly.
So it's like I love the conspiracy stuff, but it's so easy to lose yourself in it as well. It's so easy because it's really like we want to make that logical jump. Like we as humans, it's so easy to go for the interesting thing, or like with everything that's happening at the moment, like how many conspiracies are flying around about like the pandemic, like I wasn't going to talk about COVID because I find the whole thing super fucking boring, but like that free floating anxiety, like I've got a lot of friends who are so quick to point the finger and say like, it's all a conspiracy. People are being brainwashed by the government because they've got this free floating anxiety that politicians are capitalizing on. But you could go the same way and say that sense of free floating anxiety is also being triggered by people spreading disinformation on the internet. So it's like, it goes both ways, and it's so easy to fall into a trap of just taking yourself too seriously and like believing too much of this stuff.
Do you believe like there's this... Oh, sorry, Caleb.
It seems like the answer to it, well, I guess the answer to it all in the form of a question maybe is, why does it matter? Like, just focus on you. Just be a better person. It doesn't matter what the shape of the earth is or whatever. Or if 9/11 was an inside job, you can only control what you can control. And as 3 dudes sitting in South Australia, like, what can we really do about that?
But we're inquisitive beings. Like as humans, we're just inquisitive. We're always like, oh, what's over there? Something rustled. Like, it's just not going to change my life. Right. Unless it's fight or flight. But if it's far enough away, it doesn't really matter. You'll still be curious.
And I guess definitely. We're always searching for the truth. We're always trying to find our own subjective version of the truth. Like, it's a very bizarre human quality in the first place. That it seems to be this abstract idea that we're always trying to formulate. We're always trying to find, and with conspiracies, I think there's also an element of being part of an elite club. There's something that we love about that as humans. You know, like you want to train on the best powerlifting team, or you want to go out and join the best jiu-jitsu team, or you want to study under the best professor, or be part of the company that's doing well. You know, there's something about conspiracies where people love getting in a little niche club of truth, where it's like, if only everyone was as smart as we are, they would understand the truth. We understand the truth. We got this right, don't we? Yeah, definitely. You know, like it's this, like everyone is, and this is where I take a very kind of nihilistic view of a lot of this sort of stuff, where if you look at like how we exist existentially, you know, we are kind of like huddled together in the dark, telling each other it's all going to be all right. You know, like all of these stories we are sharing is kind of to like, I think Freud called it, as much as I don't like Freud, he talks about like death anxiety, like the fact that we have that where everything we do, all the truth we are trying to search for is to kind of ease us against this constant underlying voice in our head that's saying like, this is going to end soon, this is going to end soon, you know, and you want that sense of safety or of things making sense and being ordered. Like, it's all right, isn't it? Yeah, it's all good. Cool. We've got it sorted. It's flat. Like
we've got it sorted. It's flat.
I wonder if it's just to like dampen the anxiety. That's kind of what we're doing.
That's exactly what I mean. You know, like where it's almost like a nice little story, like a fairy tale we tell ourselves. You know, like I tell Logan stories when he's falling to sleep and off he goes, man. You know, like I think there's kind of an element of that we're doing in our adult life. Like everything in psychological literature, they talk about everything being like social games. And I kind of think that's almost a game, like we're like pacifying ourselves with these stories of like, it's all good, I've got it under control. Because we would rather like a horrendous known than an unknown, you know? Like I think there's always something about us that's trying to put everything in a box and get everything sorted. And that's all right, we'll put that in the flat earth box and that in the 9/11 box and that in the scientific rationalist box. And it's all good. We've got it sorted. You know, it's almost like a certain sense of like Jung talks a lot about mythos, a kind of like these stories we tell ourselves almost make the mythology of our life. And like you could look at something like World War II as an origin myth that sets the story of what the next 100 years are going to be like. So I think we're always looking for that sort of origin myth within our life, within our community, and within the greater world as a whole. We all want to know how we got here and how things have ended up the way they are, you know. And 9/11 is a real kind of like origin myth of the world we live in now, because there's certain things that it sets a precedent for, you know, like indefinite wars, like the war on terror. It's like such an abstract idea that can just be continued for so long. But a lot of it has set the narrative for like what's happening at the moment, which is not to say that there's this nefarious group of people who have done that on purpose, but to say that it's like opened up a way within the collective psyche for that to take place, you know.
It seems like generally humans, in some ways, we're getting so much smarter. Obviously, we've talked about Zoom and what we're doing right now, and someone has created this thing and people are creating all kinds of amazing things. But in other ways, the general population is getting dumber. With all this, I can't remember who talks about it, but who knew that the entire world's worth of knowledge being available for free actually could make people stupider? Yeah. It seems like we're kind of going backwards in some ways and going forwards. Do you think that, and you spoke on mythology kind of in a different sense, but do you entertain religion, whether that be like the Greek gods or Christianity or similar?
Yeah, definitely. You know, like that was a real like big part of my life as well. Like I was raised by like real extreme atheists, you know. So to be someone who was raised by an atheist and then have a religious experience, you know, there was a real point of like, oh, how am I going to put this into my life? How will I make sense of this? And I've gone through like a real period of looking at different religions. Like I think everyone has a piece of the puzzle. Like I used to go to Buddha house and do the meditations and read a lot about Buddhism. And I think that's half of how I ended up like a vegetarian, all that sort of stuff. So I definitely take a huge influence from religion because it's all archetypal, you know, like there's a lot of parallels between all these different religions. It's all the hero's journey. I guess that's what Joseph Campbell was saying, that like if you like all stories all narrative. Everything is a sort of mythology. That's why you can look at someone like Luke Skywalker and Frodo Baggins, and they have the exact same hero's path. They're both taken on by a kind of shaman archetype. They both go through this thing. So I definitely take a lot from religion. I think there's a lot to be learned from everywhere. I definitely kind of rest in agnosticism, because that's my thing. I don't think you can believe anything to make the leap. People always want to make the leap. Everyone, once again, it's been part of that elite club. Some people want to say that, maybe Christians are going to say that all the fundamental knowledge that you need to understand the universe is in the Bible. And maybe a communist is going to say that all you need to understand the world is in Das Kapital. But if you look at those books, a lot of people argue that Das Kapital is basically the Christian myth, just in sociological jargon. So it's the same story that we're kind of repeating over and over again. But everyone's got a piece of the truth. So I think there's in this kind of modern day crazy scientific world that we live in, where philosophical rationalism is the doctrine that everyone follows. And it's because people will argue that science has become scientism to some extent, of it being the fundamental mythos of explaining the world. I still think you can draw so much from other stuff, especially in terms of that thread of meaning, of finding the meaning in your life, making sense out of things, because the human life is not rational. It's chaotic, it's painful, it's extreme. It's very hard to be a mortal being. So I think that's what those stories are there for. They're there to make sense out of things. I think we should all think more about religion. And there's people will make comments on this. This guy, Rupert Sheldrake, he's a developmental biologist. And he's got all these theories about morphic resonance and stuff. Really interesting guy. And he had been a hardcore scientist for 50 years before he became a Christian. And he was actually practicing Hinduism in India when he was studying stuff over there. But he thought that it would make it easier for him to understand this stuff because it's from his genetic background. And now he's a Christian, and he's still a scientist, but that's kind of his mythos, which he uses to understand his, what would you say, existential experience as a finite being.
Yeah, trying to find meaning, I suppose that's the thing. And going more further down that kind of mythology route of people being maybe not as able as what we once were. I mean, if we look at Egypt, for example, and what kind of things they were doing, if they did actually build the pyramids, if it was in that age of however many thousands of years ago, how many 10,000 years ago or 11,000 years ago, whatever they say, if it was actually built then, that's amazing. And modern day engineers still can't really figure out how they've done it.
And it's there's a big difference between the acquisition of knowledge and critical thinking. I didn't realize how much of a dummy I am until I did a critical thinking topic at uni, and it completely changed the way I view things. You would go through I was doing critical thinking, getting the textbooks and going through the exercises and being oh wow, I really messed that up. I really didn't thinking is a skill kind of in the same way that jiu-jitsu is. It's a set of skills which you need to have to be able to understand the information that's presented to you. So it's kind of you can have all this food, but it's not necessarily nutrition. You can have all this information, but you're not necessarily thinking about it in the correct way.
Yeah. Yeah, difference between listening and hearing sort of thing. Yes. Yeah.
The difference between knowledge and intelligence as well.
And relevant knowledge. We've got all this stuff, but in terms of the interpersonal ways that we live our life, we're starved. People are more depressed than ever. Mental health is worse than ever. There's also this kind of existential part of living our life now for a lot of people that is hard. People are killing themselves. I'm sure that if you looked back thousands of years ago, suicide is not going to be more people have died by suicide than by everything that's happening now, apparently, in Australia. So it's we've got all this stuff and we've got all this knowledge, But in terms of that kind of like metaphysical, human, interpersonal world that I was talking about before, like what is that giving us? How is it making anything better in some ways? There's balance, you know, everything is always going to come back to deliberation. And I guess that's where religion ties into these things, because something like Buddhism is just telling you to reflect, think, slow down, breathe, reflect. And I think that's kind of the foundation of everything, deliberation.
I was having a conversation with someone on the weekend actually about, you can tell in a strange way people that have the ability to reflect on themselves and those 100%. That don't. And it like deepens your person somehow. Like the ability to look back on things just like opens up gateways to be able to communicate more effectively or learn from your experiences. And as you said, thinking is a skill and reflecting is a skill, and you have to practice it. And I think that that's how you get the most out of every situation. I mean, that kind of makes sense. Like that's obvious as I'm saying it, but you can really tell the difference between people that reflect and don't.
That's where growth is going to take place, surely. Like even from, I guess a lot of people that are going to listen to this is from like a health and fitness kind of thing. So it's like, you know, if you banged out a set of squats, how are you going to get better at it without thinking of where you went wrong? Like without deliberating on that kind of that session or that block of training or that whatever, you know, like I think it's very easy to get so caught up in the active element of living our lives, of doing stuff, but it's much harder to find time for the passive element of reflection, of stopping.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I think that one of the big differences in people as well is not only that reflection, but there's people that everyone's a child, essentially. You know, we're only alive for so long. And there's people that know they haven't got anything figured out, and people that think they've got everything figured out. And, you know, and no one really has it figured out. You know, even if we look back through the eons of like human history and where we went right and where we went wrong, and we can look forward and potentially try and have some kind of like forethought as to where we're going and how we can, you know, alter this trajectory in a positive way. But no one's got it figured out, you know. So you can really only look inwards, I suppose, and reflect on your experiences, and then pass that experiential understanding onto whether it be literally your own child or the people around you, and then collectively have a greater understanding of humanity.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, like you brought up Egypt before, and I think it's so like I was saying before, we're always looking backwards. And I think there's this part of us as a society that's kind of looking back now at ancient knowledge and thinking like, wow, these guys must have had it all figured out. You know, like I'm really interested in old archaic societies, but it's and I think Egypt, like we look back with this kind of superstitious view of them as like they ripped out the hearts of the dead through their nose and all this sort of stuff, when really they're talking in allegories. And they were a culture that put their best minds to the problems of life and death for millennia, but they could have got it all wrong, man. You know, like no one's really got any idea. It's a one-way journey and no one knows what's on the other side. No one has any idea. You might get some like, and that's like, I think a big pitfall of this whole kind of like plant medicine, psychedelic movement as well. It's like, well, this is a cool reference point and it's cool for growth and learning, but we always have to have that sense of humbleness and deliberation to look at ourselves and just doubt that we know everything, or that we can make any sort of like statements about reality in any way. Like Buckminster Fuller used this saying that, what did he say? The universe is non-simultaneously apprehended. And what he means is you can't know the universe or reality as a whole, because we only experience it in a little finite slice. You know, we experience everything through the nervous system. And that is also going to be filtered through our preconceived ideas, prejudices, our belief system, and all this sort of stuff. So by the time we make any sort of judgment about the world or life, we're so off the path. You know, the map is not the territory. We can formulate these maps in our head of how we think the world is, but the territory is something else entirely. You know, so how can we make any real statements with any legitimacy about the way things are? You know, and then you come back to that interpersonal world where the only things that I can say are true is like, well, I love my son. and like, I'm going to go to bed tonight. There's like some things you can say, but we often are just blundering into metaphysics all of the time. We're often making like meaningless statements. And that's why I think it's like you can get so caught up in knowledge and so caught up in stuff. And as like someone who's always tried to identify with being like the learned kind of well-read person, it wasn't until I got to 30 that I realized like, oh wait, that's kind of like a crock of shit, like it's kind of pointless.
Yeah.
If you were to
question everything.
If you were to know one thing for certain, what would it be?
One thing for certain about history,
maybe human history, or exactly how we went from monkey swinging in trees to talking over Zoom.
How to get Logan on the toilet.
Yeah, oh, dude, if I could get Logan on the toilet, man, that would be.
Yeah. Or where
I could
Hitler
get the
went.
secret source for that.
Did Hitler go to Antarctica, or if aliens exist, or the shape of the world or the earth or whatever? If you were to know one thing for certain, 100% accurate, what would it be?
Well, we've talked about this a lot, and this is just the thing that I'm interested in at the moment. But giants, man, it sounds so stupid. And like, it's one of these like stupid, it's not even a conspiracy, like this is another thing that's been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. That it's just like, it's not popular culture. So people kind of don't know about it. But I've been massively interested in it recently, of if there were giants or not. And there's like a stunning amount of information where you're like, what? Excuse me? Like, what has been happening with that? And for a while, it was like Egypt. Like I was really into Egypt, and I really would have loved to have known like how long has it been there, because that's also a contested thing too. So
we can't just like gloss over the giants thing. We have to go into this.
We have to go into giants, yes.
Okay, so at some point, there were really big people walking around.
Potentially.
Or were they flying around?
Who knows?
Were they big and hairy? I mean, we'll never know that, obviously, but...
Well, we might, like there are all these tales, like, and this is like written in colonial diaries and stuff like that. And there's records of it with the Smithsonian in America, that there were tribes of Native American red-haired cannibal giants between 7 and 9 feet. Like it's everywhere.
It's a scary thought, man.
It is. And
big gingers just running around. Cannibals.
Looking to bite your head off. Massive, angry cannibal gingers.
Dude, that is nightmare fuel.
There's pygmies, so it adds up that there should be something on the other end of the scale.
Yeah, and with the pygmies thing, it goes even further. Like there's dwellings that they've found in Scotland of people that were potentially like 2 to 3 foot tall. Like these tiny little mound building cultures. There's a lot of interesting stuff on it, and it's not really conspiracy stuff. These are like non-mainstream archaeologists looking at the records of the Smithsonian and stuff like that. And there is a real reasonable reason of why this stuff would be covered up too.
Yeah.
So like redhead giants, man, look into it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And seriously, I'm gonna have nightmares about that.
Because they're redhead or because they're giants?
Adam, if you're listening right now, I'm just imagining you as a 9 foot tall human just chasing after me. He's, one of my only ginger friends, and he's extremely redheaded.
A recessive gene.
Is it?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe. All right, we're gonna.
Yeah, that was unreal.
I think we can leave this one here for now. We definitely have to go down further, and this is not the last time that we'll have you on the TLDR cam, but. Thanks for the chat, man. We're really only scratching the surface of some of the giant redheads and what we wanted to go down. Actually, I was wearing my NASA hat today just for the
Sure.
And I wanted to go down the shadow government. Was that the term you used?
Yeah. People think it's an occupational government or a shadow government. And the big argument is that NASA is an ancient Hebrew verb for deception. Ooh.
Yeah, I've heard that actually. I have heard that.
And it has to have the ooh at the end.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, man. I've definitely learned a lot, and I look forward to continuing our conversations through Instagram DMs as we talk pretty much every day about stuff. And it's so interesting. And you're one of the most well-read dudes I've ever had the opportunity to talk to, man. So I appreciate it a lot.
Oh,
and,
man,
and we'll have to get you back on.
And like I was saying, in the interpersonal world of human stuff, dude, you're one of the coolest people I've ever met. I've always had so much respect for you and how you handle yourself. And I'm so glad we've been able to get together for a chat. And to everyone that's listening, the few people who are listening, I apologize for all the ranting. I had 3 shots of espresso in my son's Peter Rabbit cup before I came on here. And I'm in my shed sweating buckets.
It's fine, man.
I
This
was
is
in,
literally a weekly occurrence for us. Where
Yeah.
I don't know how many shots of caffeine I've had today, but it's quite a lot. So
I'm buzzing. No,
but it's been awesome to come talk to you guys, man. I really have appreciated it. It's been
we'll do it again,
a lot of
man.
fun.
Don't worry about that.
Sweet.
Well, thanks very much, Cam. I appreciate it as always. Thanks, Tom.
Cheers, mate.
And we'll see you next time.